come back. We are in the HashiCorp certified Terraform associate GitHub repository and in 05 Terraform variables. So inside that we are going and then learning about the input variable 0501. In 0501 we are going to see close to 11 folders which are related to input variables. So 10 different ways the input variables how we are going to use, we are going to learn, and 11 we are going to learn about one of the file functions. Okay, so our first thing here is we will go inside v1 input variables basics and then learn the input variable basics now. So as part of introductory part, we have already seen what we are going to learn from v1 to v11. Okay, another important thing is we already created the Terraform key and then using it. So if it is not created, just go ahead and then create it. So as part of section here, like in this respective section, we already created it in resources, and when we are dealing with depends on, so we already created a Terraform key. So if it is not created, so now also you have an option to go to instances in AWS Management Console. Inside instances, go to network and security, key pairs, and then create your Terraform key. And another important thing here is why we are creating this Terraform key and all these things is because we are going to have a real use case here. Okay, even though we are learning variables here, so the EC2 instance file, whatever we are going to create, right, so it is going to look like more or less like creating a EC2 instance and then deploying a simple AWS a simple Apache web server inside that. So as part of that, so if we, for our EC2 instance configuration also, we are going to configure the Terraform key here. Okay, so that if you want to log into EC2 instance to troubleshoot anything, already a PEM file is mapped here, so that what happens is like you will be able to log into your respective EC2 instance to troubleshoot your issue. Okay, so now let's go back to input variables. Here it is. Okay, so the step here is reference subfolder is v1 input variable basics. Okay, so we need to create or review the Terraform manifest c1 versions.tf, means like standard our versions.tf about the Terraform CLI required version, AWS provider required version, and also defining the provider. And next is C2 variables, where we define our variables, input variables inside this file. And C3 is security groups. Since we are going to install a sample application in our EC2 instance using user data, so we also need to access that application with port 80, right? So for that purpose, you also need to define your respective security groups and then associate that security groups to EC2 instance, and finally define your EC2 instance resource also. So these things we are going to create now, and from variables perspective, 3 things we are going to variabilize as part of this respective step. When we go to next step, we might add one more. So one is AWS region, EC2 AMI ID, and EC2 instance count. Okay, so these things we are going to variabilize now. So let's go back to our Visual Studio Code. We are in 05 Terraform variables, 0501 Terraform input variables. Inside that v1 input variables basic. Okay, in c1 versions.tf, it is a standard file which we have seen earlier also. So we are not going to look into anything. So if you see v2, v3, v4, various ways you can use the input variables. Everything is defined in a step-by-step manner for our learning. So let me make this smaller. And now let's start defining the variables, right? So before defining the variables, let's go back and then create a EC2 instance related template first. Okay, then we will move on to defining the variables and then variabilizing that for which variables we are going to do now. Okay, so control space and then resource and AWS underscore instance. Okay, and name of my EC2 instance, I can give it as my EC2 VM. Okay, and we will start with AMI and AMI value here. Okay, so usually we have already discussed about these things multiple times, but one more time we will write it. Okay, so what's wrong here? Okay, so launch instance and get your AMI ID and then put it here. So this value you can variabilize, right? So we can do that. And here one more, which is instance type. Okay, t3.micro. So even this one we can bring from variables. Okay, so we will do that. Okay, so this all should be inside instance. Okay, sorry, here. Okay, not in variables, in instance, in EC2 instance, C4 EC2 instance, we are creating the EC2 instance now. The next thing is, we already discussed about the key name, right? So in key name we are going to provide Terraform -key. And one more is count. If you remember, the count is the thing, one more we have learned about it. So we'll say count as 1 or 2 or how many number of instances. So dedicatedly we have learned this in Terraform resources. Okay, and next is user data. So for user data, so we are planning to install a simple Apache web server. So if you remember here in resources and in meta arguments, depends on, here we have done this. Okay, so user data and then tags. So let me copy these things from here. Okay, okay, so if your AMI is a Amazon Linux AMI, just remember this. So this is a Amazon Linux, so that this user data is going to work fine. Amazon 2 Linux. Okay, so now it will install the HTTPD, enable the HTTPD for and then start the HTTPD, and then also update index.html with some sample code. That's what is the user data here. And we also added the tags here. So this is about a basic EC2 instance. Okay, so now what we will do is, so we will variabilize few things here, not that everything, few things we'll use it for the next sections about the input variables. But for now we will play with 3 variables. So one is count, one is AMI ID from this EC2 instance perspective, and one more we are going to do is the first one. Okay, so the region. Okay, so this region we are going to first create the variable. Okay, input variable here. So for input variable, again it is the main block only here. Okay, root block only. So control space and I will select as variable. And what is the variable name? AWS_region, right? So let me save this, and from here, so we can first have the description of this variable. So region in which AWS resources to be created. And the second thing is, this variable is of type. Okay, so AWS region we are going to define it as string. So we are going to define the variable as a type as string. And one more is, we can even define the default value of this input variable. So I'll define the default value for this value is US East 1. Okay, so we can override these things with the different things here in V2, V3, V4, V5 like this. Multiple things you can do by overriding this default value, right? So for now default value is this, and you can override via CLI or override via TF var files. So all those things you can do, we'll see later about those things. But for now the default value for AWS region is US East 1. So now you define this variable. So let's call this variable from here. Okay, so here just remove this and say var.aws_region. Okay, so this is what is the variable name. So if you go here, AWS_region. So in C1.versions you replace that variable value with var.aws_region. Good. So now your first variable is completed. So let's move on to second variable. Again the control space and then variable and EC2_AMI_ID. So now we are defining the AMI ID here. Okay, so now as usual again we will start with the description, and I'll just say AMI ID. If you want, you can write this inside this, the value is going to be AMI ID XYZ, whatever you want. Okay, So, and the type we are going to define it as string, and one more is default. Okay, so the default value of the AMI also we can provide here. So I'll copy this and paste it, right? So one more variable we'll define, which is nothing but 2 times you have defined the type as means like data type as string. Okay, so now why don't we define the data type as number? Okay, because instance count, okay, count is equal to 1 or count is equal to 2 is a number. So let's define a number here. Okay, so variable and type is ec2 underscore instance underscore count. So you can use hyphen or underscores here for the names. And the first thing is description. Okay, for description I'll say ec2 instance count, and next comes the type. I am going to say number, and default value 1 or 2, how much you want to give you can give here. Okay, so now let's go back to our ec2 instance here. Okay, and you know that this is a Amazon Linux, so let me move this from here and then go to variables and say this as Amazon Linux, Amazon to Linux AMI ID. Okay, just for our convenience. So now let's come back here and first thing call about the AMI ID. So var dot ec2 underscore AMI ID. In the same way, one more variable we have defined, var dot ec2 underscore instance count. So now we have called 2 variables here. I can even put here like this. Okay, so we have called 2 variables here. One is AMI ID, AMI is equal to var dot ec2 AMI ID, which will bring the value from the variables. Okay, so if whatever the default value is there, that is what it is going to populate for us. Okay, in the same way, one more is var dot ec2 underscore instance count. Now also define the security groups. Okay, so if you install the application here, you need to also have a security group for your application, correct, right? Why? Because you need to access your application Apache web server using port 80 or this ec2 instance using Terraform key using port 22. So its equivalent security group we need to add it. So let's add it. Only these things, means like these security groups and ec2 instances, we are going to do a live template writing now for this section, and we are going to reuse for all these 11 sections. Okay, so let's go ahead and then write that too. We'll go ahead and write this security group in our next lecture. So I'll see you in the next lecture. Until then, bye bye. Thank you.